So this event, what is a quest for proof? I know it's a funny little title, and I think I'm so funny all the time. But a quest for proof is that undying search for meaning beyond our everyday existence. That quest for something magical in our mundane world. That proof that there is more out there beyond this life. Whatever form that may take for you, in the form of ghosts and miracles, or angels, or aliens, or whatnot. It's just that undying, search for something more. There are syllabus cards in your handout envelopes that will kind of guide you through the evening on your individual quest for proof. We'll start with some kind of basic history about what prompted this quest for proof. We'll learn from Ms. Eiley Bowers what it was like to live and work as a fortune teller during the Victorian era. We will then conduct a series of experiments with techniques that were used during this time to try and make contact with the other side. In the Victorian era, dead people were all the rage. The average lifespan in 1900 was just 47 years old. 47. Like, 47, that's not that old. Like, I think we're kind of past that, sadly. But no wonder Victorians were so obsessed with passage from life to death. Spiritualism attempted to bridge that gap between the living and the dead and rose to prominence during the Victorian era of 1837 to 1901. Spiritualism is thought to be the hybrid child of religious intensity, scientific curiosity, mysticism, but it was also born out of grief. It was inclusive of everyone and didn't limit who it attracted. It theorized that direct correspondence with those on the other side through seances and mediums and spirit guides, channeling, and even spirit boards like the Ouija board were not only possible, but they were accessible to everyone. The spiritualism movement emerged in response to religious and social upheavals, such as slavery and women's rights issues. It gained momentum through mediums who claimed to communicate with spirits of the deceased, fostering a belief in an afterlife and the ability to connect with the spirit world. It became a cultural phenomenon, with seances and spiritualistic gatherings, attracting widespread attention and contributing to the broader landscape of the religious experimentation and mysticism that was happening. Part of the allure of spiritualism was its flexibility. It wasn't overwhelmingly strict. It could be combined with existing religions and political beliefs and appeal to those who had begun to abandon conventional religions. It was considered more of a scientific religion or a movement, and it didn't ask anyone to believe anything based on blind faith alone, but rather on witnessed phenomena. Even though the Victorian era is often associated with scientific and technological progress, many Victorians were strong believers in the paranormal, supernatural, and the occult, which stem from their long-standing cultural traditions. America is absolutely a melting pot. Well, spiritualism was huge in Victorian Britain, and is often what we think of as the starting point of this movement. It actually was part of the larger religious expansion that began earlier in the 19th century in upstate New York. It's generally agreed that the movement itself began on April 1st, 1848, in Hyattsville, New York, when the younger Fox sisters, Maggie, who was around 14 or 15, and Kate, who was around 11 or 12, convinced their parents and some of their neighbors that an unsettling series of knocking or tapping that was happening in their homes near Lake Ontario was coming from the spirit world. Soon, the entire town was gripped by the mysterious noises that haunted the Fox family home. The girls claimed that they were able to communicate with a spirit called Mr. Splitfoot, who they claimed was making noises from beyond the grave. The spirit would answer questions by rapping with simple yeses and nos in response to questions, but then also started using more complicated series of rapping to indicate letters of the alphabet. In this manner, the spirit allegedly revealed that he had been a peddler named Charles Rosa, who had been murdered for the sum of $500 by the previous owner of the house, Mr. John Bell. The revelation was only further excited when residents of this town later discovered that there were actually bones in that cellar. The Fox family moved from that home to another home and another home and another home. Oops, somebody doesn't keep doing this. Sorry. My bad. I fired myself. Over the next few months, they just kept moving from house to house, and the rappings continued to follow the girls. Since their hometown was in such a tizzy over the girls and their abilities, they were sent to live in Rochester with their older sister, Rita, who took on the role as caregiver and manager of the girls. She's the one that devised the plan to start charging a fee for the exhibitions put on by the girls. In the fall of 1849, 400 people paid to witness what had been advertised as a wonderful phenomenon. It was the first of many appearances by the girls over the next 40 years, and the money poured in. Other women came forward and claimed that they could also instigate rapping from the dead, and seances became commonplace. Next. The rise of spiritualism was due in great deal to morality rates, such as complications during childbirth, disease, uncleanly conditions, a little thing called the Civil War, a big deal. Mary Todd Lincoln lost 3 of her 4 children. She would often visit mediums in Georgetown and then began hosting seances in the White House. Could you even imagine a time when a first lady was having seances in the White House?
Yes, of course.
Literally, seances at the White House. So that just kind of sets the precedent for how big this movement was in this country, that is okay. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but it was just that common that no big deal. So after President Lincoln was assassinated, she hired the country's most famous spirit photographer to take this portrait. You can barely see it, but it is a famous mourning portrait. Spirit photography was not just about memorializing the lost loved one, but it also provided some confirmation of life after death. It was highly sought after in the years following the Civil War, when around 750,000 dead soldiers were haunting this country. This sent a lot of people on their own quest for proof and to try and connect with their lost loved ones.
Did you guys see the picture of the Lincoln?
Right, you can kind of see him a little on the side.
Top right, you can see him looking down a little bit over her. And those are his hands.
His hands on her shoulders.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Kind of creepy.
Oh, you're right back there.
Oh, he loved her.
Of course. She was crazy.
No.
Mark Twain, Frederick Douglass, and Queen Victoria were just a few of the prominent people who all attended seances. It was so popular that even skeptics felt compelled to explore it. And yeah, a lot of people didn't so much as even attend a single table turning, but it was really hard to ignore this movement. Such a large number of people would have admitted to having contact with ghosts. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert participated in numerous spiritual seances. The year that Prince Albert died of typhoid, a 13-year-old boy participated in a seance with the family and passed a message from Prince Albert to Queen Victoria in which he called her by a pet name that was only known between the two of them. Oh, wow. Don't ask me to say it, it's in German. We'll talk about it later. But it essentially means my sweet little wife in German. I could almost guess that, but didn't really want to frighten anyone. Spiritualism was far more accepting of women and people of color and others whose cultural heritage was not part of the mainstream. The majority of mediums were women and were often thought of as being more spiritually capable than men, just more inclined to have that spiritual connection. It doesn't mean that men weren't mediums, it was kind of a thing. This was in a time when occupations for women were pretty limited. Obviously like the standard ones like teacher or laundress or brothel employees. This was another way for women to have occupations under their own names and under their own terms, which gave them a great deal of freedom. We'll hear a little bit from one of our famous such women, Miss Ivy Bowers, here in a little bit. Spiritualism was popular in part because it was entertaining in a time long before Netflix. It was a chance to potentially make contact with spirits on the other side, but it was also something really fun to do. I mean, what else are you going to do on a Friday night? Get together with your friends, have a little seance. We'll see if we can make contact with our grandma, or at least, if nothing else, we'll have a few laughs. In the span of 4 decades, it's estimated that a new book or article about spiritualism was published roughly one a week in 4 decades. That's a long time. That's how popular it was that, this sheer volume of articles and things that were out is just, kind of amazing. Spirit societies were incredibly popular and gave people a chance to get together, much like events like this, where we can share our experiences and, try experiments, see, have you had luck? Have you tried this? I heard about this thing. Let's give this a try. So it's super entertaining. The first major historian of the movement was Arthur Conan Doyle. He's the creator of Sherlock Holmes, in case that name doesn't sound familiar. He joined a psychic research organization that would investigate any claims of spiritualism or other paranormal activity. They would carry out a series of experiments, and he was convinced that telepathy or thought transference did exist and was entirely possible. We're actually going to try and experiment with this and the crystal balls a little bit later. The use of technology to document spiritual phenomenon was of interest not only to believers, but also to skeptics. The most popularized attempt to test the claims of spiritualism was brought by Scientific American, who offered $5,000 in prize money to anyone that could produce a psychic phenomenon sufficient enough to convince a committee of academics from Harvard, MIT, psychic experts, and even Harry Houdini himself, who knew a little something about illusion and actually developed a side hustle in exposing frauds that were trying to pass off fake evidence as real. We could really use them again today. The committee tested all mediums who presented themselves and would attend multiple seances. It wasn't just like a one-time thing, oh, you're a fraud. They would actually go to several seances and really do their research into it. Often the more scrutinized a medium was, the more popular they became, such as Mina Carden and Leonora Piper, both of whom endured endless scrutiny. Mrs. Carden was prevented from winning the Scientific American Prize by Houdini, who actually incorporated some of her tactics and her tricks into his own stage act. They were so good. Miss Piper, on the other hand, was never fully discredited. Many people did doubt her abilities, but they couldn't actually prove what she was doing. The Fox sisters that I mentioned earlier, who were credited with starting the spiritualism craze, entertained at private gatherings and large public audiences in America and Europe for over 40 years. Hold on, I'm behind again. Okay. The next 40 years, and during examinations by physicians and critics alike, who would strip search them looking for physical explanations or external assistance on their bodies. They were attacked by mobs of skeptics, both religious and not, who threatened to harm them. Many people tried to discredit them, but in the end, they discredited themselves. They were offered $1,500 by a reporter to go to New York and expose themselves as frauds. Can't really see that. But in October of 1888, Maggie declared that the whole thing had been a hoax. An advertisement ran in New York City which announced the death of spiritualism and promised a thorough and complete expose. The girls, who were now in their 50s and were struggling with alcoholism. That's kind of the price of fame, I suppose. In 1892, Kate died of end-stage alcoholism, and later that year, Maggie died of the same. Both sisters died penniless, shunned by their friends, and were buried in paupers' graves. Those bones that I mentioned earlier that were in the cellar, in 1904, a story ran in the Boston Journal stating that the remains that were found in that cellar, there was no police investigation that actually was conducted. The physician who examined them said, yeah, there were some bones, there were some teeth, a lot of chicken bones, and it was probably just buried there as a hoax by a tenant. Obviously, that property is well known, so anybody's gonna try and jump on that bandwagon. As sad as that was, that didn't even come close to ending the quest for proof. Come close to ending the quest for proof, as it was not just a passing phenomenon. We were all, in reality, spiritualism never really came and went. Necromancy had just faded from cultural memory when Queen Victoria was born, and long after her death, people with spiritualistic beliefs continued to gather at spiritualist churches around the world. Look at the popularity in today's culture still. Look at the number of ghost shows that are on every YouTube channel, everybody's everything. We are still completely obsessed with this quest for proof. It never went away. And so it's sad what happened with the Fox sisters, but here we are still doing this. We are still living and breathing this every day. And our modern paranormal investigations today have a lot in common with that of the spiritualistic movement in the Victorian era, as we're situated in another era of rapid technological change and increasing scrutinization. The internet, AI, and virtual reality are all equivalent to the Victorian technologies behind the telegraph and the telephone and the photograph. They are technologies that are advancing so fast that they're approaching on the uncanny. Then, as in now, spiritualism surrounds true believers. Arthur Conan Doyle's view may have been the right one when he wrote essentially that there's never been a time when abnormalities and strange phenomena didn't exist, where our world is suspended between the mundane and the miraculous. The dread of mortality has always inspired the dream of immortality, and the hopes that animated Victorian spiritualism are eternal. To bridge that divide between ourselves and those we have lost, to know that they are safe and content, and to believe that they are thinking of us just as much as we are thinking of them.